Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this PyroLife webinar. I'll be your main moderator. I'm Mario Tapia, and I'm one of the early stage researchers associated with PyroLife. PyroLife trains the future experts able to provide a highly needed understanding of fire in its global, multi, inter, and transdisciplinary contexts in both traditionally and non-traditionally fire-prone countries. PyroLife is funded by the prestigious Marie Curie Action within the European Horizon 2020 program. We've had more than 400 people register for the symposium, and we're excited for everyone to join us. So today, as usual, we'll have two speakers, each followed with a Q&A session. Each speaker will present for 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer session of 10 to 15 minutes. Participants' audio and video are disabled, and questions can be asked using the Q&A functionality during the presentation. And our moderators will gather questions while the session is ongoing. PyroLife is intent on supporting inclusivity, and participants are invited to ask questions in their native language, and answers will be translated in English on our behalf. All these webinars will be recorded and available on the Symposium webpage and the PyroLife YouTube channel within a week. So we request that if you refer to us on social media, if you could please use the hashtag PyroLife Symposium and hashtag PyroLife webinars to help us spread the word. For our final speaker today, I would like to introduce Lucian Deaton, Program Manager at the National Fire Protection Association. Lucian manages international outreach for NFPA's Wildfire Division, focusing on community engagement, research, and the Firewise USA Program adaptation by valued collaborators. He also focuses on policy issues surrounding structural risk reduction and has previously worked on public safety advocacy. He holds a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning and a Master's of Natural Resources degrees from Virginia Tech and lives in Denver, Colorado. And today he's going to be talking about building an informed and engaged public to protect structures from wildfire. And I would like to hand it over to Lucian.
Thank you very much. And forgive me as I get the screen shares and all this going. There's a couple of windows that have to move at once. Let us see. And there we are. And I also have the somewhat unenviable but challenging position to present after those great ESRs presenting about their background and their current research and what they're adding to this discipline. And Nuria's great presentation and also a very cute video of goats. So starting upon the back hoof, if you will, we'll go forward and present here. We will be talking about this idea of an engaged public, and Nuria's presentation is a great one to follow on because her talking about connecting the actors in society, sharing and engaging and developing these networks of collaborators is very important across the practitioners and also who they're involving as well. And we've heard previous presentations talk of this. Alexander Held's presentation was great on this as well, and we'll add to that discussion today. A little bit of background first on the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA is a global self-funded nonprofit organization. We're based in Boston, Massachusetts, and then I'm in Denver, Colorado with another one of our offices. It was established in 1896 and is devoted to eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, and related hazards. And obviously one of those related hazards is wildfire and the built environment. Specifically for us, the risk of embers to structures and to communities. And in particular, and what we'll expand on today, is the resident as an active partner in the solution for wildfire in emerging areas, in areas where we've seen it for years that have a history of it. Bit of background first. This picture in the background is of Paradise, California, and had the sobering opportunity to visit there actually with the Pau Costa Foundation, who came over to California, and some folks from European Research to walk through this community and see the impacts that occurred. And it was a wildfire, but it was a reminder that it's about people. Most of the structures in that community had burned. There were some that survived, others that didn't. We talked about reasons why some may have and not, as this fire cast itself upon the community and then ignited it. But it was a reminder that it's a human variable that deals with wildfire, and it's a very challenging variable. I want to go through some ideas on that. It's considerations of land use and economic development for a locality as it's developing or as a town is developing. How is that dealt with regionally or at the state level or at the national level? There's a lot of competing hopes and goals. Local building policies, those regulations, also the composition, the construction of the homes in a community, the age of the built environment, factors that come into play about how long people have been there. The issue of private property and the public perception of ownership. How do they own the thing that will receive the risk? What are their roles in dealing with it? It's their home, it's their castle, as we would hear. How do you get them to become a part of that process? The perception of the risks that they have and what the role of the resident is in dealing with that. How far along are they in understanding that there is a risk here? Did they move to the area that has a risk and bring a perception of theirs from another place about the risk itself of wildfire, how it can be responded to, the risk to homes, all the rest. And certainly a lot of social equity issues, the affordability of homes, the accessibility of them for certain groups, the ability to address the risk by folks who are in that community. Can we assume, or are we right to assume, that they have the time, the ability to deal with certain things around their home? What else is competing for their time? And is the community even recognized? This is an issue internationally when we talk about informal settlements. Danielle Antonellis spoke to this early on in the seminar series. But even in the US, more rural communities, are they forgotten about? Are they overlooked by a state when they're looking at where are the risks? And then internationally, where are those communities as well? Why are they being overlooked? These are all challenges, and it lets us say that this challenge before us isn't rocket science. It's far more difficult. It's social science. And Dr. Jack Cohen, who's now retired from the U.S. Forest Service Missoula Fire Lab, stressed upon this often, this human dimension that comes into wildfire that cannot be overlooked and needs to be included for better understanding. But how does this then fit in the problem? This idea of social science and its importance in wildfire. I want to go through a bit of a construct here. Natural wildfire will occur in many ecosystems. It's a natural part of that ecosystem's regeneration, of its history, of its health. Those become wildfires, and they come into the wildfire-urban interface, which we think of as where it's a set of conditions where homes and other things are brought together. It's not often a defined line, but think of communities either in forests or against forest lines, or that could be reached by embers. And then they, we so often see, become urban conflagrations as the fires take over in a community. The fuel changes to a built environment, and it spreads. We see this in California, but we've also seen it in Greece, in Portugal, unfortunately with deaths and the rest. So we have severe fire conditions, fuel, weather, topography, the other issues that we've heard in this seminar. That leads to a wildfire, a rapid spread or a high intensity of that fire going across a landscape. And it meets where the built environment is, either by embers or then what those embers start to do when they land in a community. And what they're landing on, we start to see multiple ignitions if there hasn't been preparedness ahead of time. And we're going to talk about this as we go on. Once that starts burning, we see an overwhelmed fire suppression. There's too much fire and too few resources to deal with it because it's shifted. It's not a wildland fire anymore. It's an urban conflagration. The wildfire may well have moved on. but it's still casting embers, or it has cast its embers. Those have now ignited things, and that fuel has changed and is now burning. It then moves to a reduced fire protection situation because there is that lack of resources. There's now a lack of effectiveness in how it's being engaged. And of course, the community burns. You see multiple homes destroyed, communities lost entirely. So if we focus on this issue at the urban fire part, those initial ignitions, how they're occurring, what can be done about that, and who can play a part in that focus, we can stop them. That stops the overwhelmed fire suppression, that stops the reduced fire protection, the effectiveness, and it stops the disaster from occurring. It breaks that inevitable cycle, which seems to be felt by some. And thus, it takes us to, I think, a better understanding of what can occur. That it's the embers, not the fire front, that threaten homes, and that the resident-led model has advantages for social behavioral change in that environment. I think it's important to think about what are the key motivations then? Who are we trying to motivate? What motivates them to possibly play a role in this solution? And this graph is from a study that NFPA did in 2010. NFPA has managed the Firewise USA program since the early 2000s, and it allows residents in communities that have self-identified to work collaboratively on goals over the course of a year, on action plans, and then on a effort of renewal to show that they are still committed to the process going forward each year to reduce the risk of wildfire around their homes. And NFPA asked them, what motivates you? Why are you really doing this? You know, what's in there? I think assuming that it was about home protection, issues like that. But what we found was that from a list of questions, the 74%, the overwhelming majority, said that what motivated them to play a role in this process and to reduce the risk of fire around their home was to improve firefighter safety, those who were coming into the community, those who were trying to fight this larger fire, and the fire response. Now that may be unique to the US context, but when you're looking at outreach programs and the rest, either through baseline data first or down the road, really look at what is the motivating factors for those audiences and see how that can then influence the outreach you're trying to do, the research you're trying to do, or how you can present what you've done to that audience. You may want to wrap it in the envelope of whatever that motivation is. Certainly for firefighter safety, it's one that we use. So what do these motivations influence? You know, the who, what's the connection there? NFPA calls this the fire and life safety ecosystem. It very much mirrors what Nuria was talking about with the network of collaborators, looking to see who are the players and how do you connect them. Her part in research, this in a larger piece. But it looks across government responsibility, codes and standards, investment in safety, a skilled workforce, compliance, response, and importantly, for us, an informed public. All of these cogs need to work together, and all of them need to be equally weighted. They need to come to the table to play their role, and they also can't be forgotten about. They can't be overlooked. But it does influence how you can then look at your environment. If you're starting off or if you're in it and you're trying to see why are we making headway but not the type that we want, why are we not making deeper connections somewhere. You can have an imbalance in this fire and life safety ecosystem. You know, you can have a very informed public through public education, through things you're doing. Maybe there are some reference standards that help back up that science of research fits into here. There may be some fire departments who are engaged or helping to advance that message, but then the policy side, the government responsibility side is not connected as well. How it deals with compliance, how it deals with the development of codes to actually advance the public education into reality in the built environment, and a workforce component. You know, is there a skilled workforce who can do those sorts of things, who can advance the policy? There may be an imbalance where either it's fire department led or it's starting off, and there's a great passion by the fire department to identify this larger risk and see how they can play a role in it, and maybe bring others along. We see this in the UK, we see this in Italy with agencies in Spain and other places. A real and healthy view by fire services of who they need to bring along to make this work. But then where's the government connection? Are they bought into it? Are they connected? You know, the informed public is something they're trying to create, but they're far off. Standards aren't there to help advance it. The research maybe not be connected. Compliance, there's development of codes, the workforce to help advance it. It's a scattered of the ecosystem and an imbalance in the weight of each of them. So there are going to be challenges going forward. The lesson then is to make them balanced, to bring them along, to find a way to connect with each in that networking, in those collaborations, and over time to bring them all up so they're equally working in a way that can advance the effort that's going on the ground. But what does this balanced system allow for? You know, once you're striving for it, once you've identified the players and where they fit, maybe once you're bringing some others along, what does this give? And a workshop participant back in 2002 with Firewise stood up at the end of a presentation and said, I didn't know there was something I could do to protect my home from wildfire. It's this idea of empowerment. Who are you trying to empower? What information are you bringing to do that? And then how do you see them acting in an effort going forward? What we talk about, and I'll go into a bit of the construction of the messaging for Firewise, is a focus on the home ignition zone. This idea of areas around a structure that need to be considered for what's on them, for how they relate back to the structure themselves, and how they relate to the fire that may be passing or coming to them. A lot of this is based on research in the late 90s by people like Jack Cohen, Steve Quarles, and others who went up to the northern part of Canada and in a amazing way got permission to cordon off chunks of a boreal forest in northern Canada and set them on fire to see, they were controlled, to see what is a crown fire. But also, what does that mean to structures that may be around it? And they found that on flat ground, they later have worked on issues of slope and issues of other things. But on that flat ground, they found distances that, yes, if you're within a certain range, the heat, the radiation, the rest from that fire is going to affect a structure. But as you come back, it won't. It's other issues that are burning down homes. And that's where they really got into this idea of embers casting, where they're landing, what they're landing on, and what that does to the structure after the fire's left. The big important part is the immediate zone, that 1 to 3 meters, 1 to 2.5 meters around a structure. Because an ember, excuse me, an ember landing there has an immediate impact and immediate risk to the structure itself. Is it landing in a gutter that has debris in it, seasonal debris? Is it landing against the side of the house that has leaves and the rest? What's against that side of the house that can now transfer the fire from the ember to the fuel to the structure itself? And importantly, what doesn't have to be done? We're not talking about moonscaping out to 30 meters. There can be forests, there can be trees there. Homes can live in the environment that they wish, but how do you keep it spaced and healthy and not overgrown so that it's not an integral part? And then once that ember lands on the house, how does it go out so it doesn't ignite the home and then become a risk to the larger community as the home is burning and casting itself upon other areas? The other piece, obviously, is that within 10 meters, which was thought of as this zone where embers and the proximity to the direct fire become the most at risk. If within 10 meters of the home is another home, then there's a shared risk, and neighbors are key. to what they can do. And our collaborator in Ireland said to me on a phone call that I'm so happy I wrote this down. He just paused and said, Firewise helps because it gives them something to do. It's that after you've presented about the risk. You've taught them about the risk, you've told them what they can do around their home, maybe handed out materials, but now what? What continues that effort after the workshop to actual action? And here it's an issue about peer-to-peer exchange. It's an issue about neighbors talking about the shared risks they have and then what they can do about it together to motivate each other. And to maybe even create that environment where someone's nudged into doing stuff around their home because so many of their neighbors are as well. And also seeing demonstrations of this philosophy in their own neighborhood. So they see that it's not moonscaping, that it's not difficult, and that it's something that is achievable over time. So across the ecosystem of stakeholders, this can then bring them into play, because it also speaks about which of each of those groups can play a part, or which maybe should play a part that you need to reach out to and include. We've seen in a lot of cases about creating the conversation, about starting off and seeing what's that knowledge and then what needs to be done. Possibly not rushing in with a program, but starting to develop the understanding of the risk. I was very fortunate to visit the work that the Pau Costa Foundation is doing in Catalonia. And they're seeing the transfer of land from agricultural, from very managed in that context, to being reforested because it's turning away from agriculture. And they have been doing as much an education about what that now means for the landscape and what new forests mean for risk and what is forest fire, as they are directly talking about the risk to homes, because they needed to build that understanding. And of course, it's also occurring amongst agencies. When we were up in Girona, which is north of Barcelona, north of Manresa, they had 4 agencies come together who deal with emergency response across land management, forestry, local. And this was the first time that many of them had met on this issue of wildfire. So they're creating the conversation amongst the agencies to start that process that could then go towards educating others. In Italy, they used what NFPA had started a couple of years ago, the Wildfire Community Preparedness Day, which is a day to advance the idea of preparedness educationally, project-wise, others. And in Catalonia, they've done this. In Italy, they've done this. The local fire agency took residents on a walk through shared areas that came up upon homes to talk about the risk and why this was an issue, to help them understand what could be done in Parkland successfully, just to start to socialize it, where then they could go to homes and talk to residents about what do you need to do, but showing that collective presence across the agencies, so there's a legitimacy, and importantly, local agencies doing it. So the local resident is seeing their local agency telling them about a risk, and then bringing that socializing to the communities themselves, to the kitchen table, so to speak, to talk about what can they collaboratively do in their own communities. That becomes that issue of community engagement, this idea of peer-to-peer exchange. And in South Africa, this was Sir Lowry's Pass, which is to the east of Cape Town. They were creating demonstration gardens to show the idea of the spacing of plants, the type of plants that could be used around a home that are less susceptible to fire if one came into the community and was blowing embers into it, to show what the stuff on paper meant in practice, and also to bring communities together with a board to then start to actualize this, coming together to have a sign of recognition, but also to work collaboratively to advance education within the community. This was a community which, unfortunately, I may butcher the name of. I apologize ahead of time. Hoogtewacht, which was north of Cape Town. and they were going through fire education with their local fire department to learn how to understand the risk better. And from this, setting up fire weather stations, setting up evacuation understanding, and all the rest. So it starts to socialize it into education. And then, of course, listening to voices that are often overlooked. NFPA was very fortunate to be in Chile a couple times with groups that are working on Firewise there, and also with different agencies. And this was a trip where we visited with a community of indigenous residents who knew the history of the land, knew the history of fire, knew that their water table was dropping, and that by drought and other issues of forestry, their area was more at risk to fire. And they were being engaged with to learn what that history was, and then also how they could play a part in ensuring their community remained safe. And it was really a great time to be able to be welcome in their community and to visit with them and to learn from them over the better part of a day that we spent with them that time. So for a conclusion, to keep us on time, I want to take everything we've talked about and put it into this idea of a sustainability spectrum for true social behavioral change. We want to achieve a social behavioral change, the idea of what the resident can do around their homes, because we want to keep communities from burning down. We want to keep those embers from igniting so much of a home that it becomes the fuel. And now that the wildfire is left, it's become an urban conflagration. But how do you go at this? Starting off, what is the focus? Is it public education? All the way to community-owned action. Effectively, how much time do you have? Where's a good place to start? And if you need to create the conversation first, start with that public education. Find those ways to have an event day that introduces people to it, that then you can build on towards the idea of them owning that the actions that can reduce the risk to their homes. This may take time. Importantly, will the change go away when the change goes away? So many times these efforts are led by money, or they use money to fast track the work that they know needs to be done, the work that they know people need to adopt. But when the funding for that goes away, maybe reimbursements for certain actions, or they're paying to do the work for the resident, when it goes away, has the change that has tried to be introduced really sunken into the community? Or was it just owned by the operating group that was trying to push it? And now that the funding's gone, it's gone as well. This is a really important one to focus on, because it means who are you trying to work with? What are you trying to get them to do, so that they're a partner in the project and not just someone who's receiving the goodwill of the project? Is it a demonstration project with a close date? How much time do you actually have to work on this? And if it is, it may be a different alignment about what you want to set the foundation for, to then build on, or to key groups up that can continue it after, and not try to solve it within the time frame of the project, because ultimately it won't be solved in the time frame of the project. The only thing that'll be solved is the paper deliverable. To that point are the local elected officials, the community leaders involved. And we talked about the legitimizing of the message. If it's being brought from the outside, they may listen to it, but they don't see themselves in it. Who's presenting it to them, and who's a part of that project at the start? Who's being listened to? Who can help push that forward? Because possibly when the money goes away, or when the time of the project goes away, has it become a part of the local policy, the local understanding, ordinances, codes, projects by agencies? Or was it just a one-off, something that filled the immediate need after a risk to show action, but didn't become a part of a piece? So if you involve those local elected officials or community leaders early and get their buy-in and get their involvement, it becomes a part of what they're doing, and it gets legs, it gets sustainability. And finally, as we've said all along, who owns the achievement? Does the program own it that's trying to present it? The organization that may be falling into a trap of promoting what they're doing, but forgetting that it's the resident that needs to own it, both in philosophy and also in action, so that it continues long after the group is gone, but also so that the group can work with more areas because they can set it up, they can gain that buy-in, they can have them doing, and then they can go to another community and know that it's running on its own. The model of Firewise certainly speaks to this sustainability, so that when it's locally owned, it has those legs going forward. That, Mario, is what I wanted to share today, and I want to thank PyroLife for having us on. And I'm happy to talk to any questions that may be and explore this further with folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucian. It was great to hear your insights on how community engagement can contribute to wildfire safety. And with that, I'd like to pass on the torch to Nemr for the question and answer.
I need to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. I apologize. Here we go. Stop sharing. Now we can see people.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lucian, for the great presentation. Very, very informative.
Just saw at the bottom there are a load of questions, so we'll go through them and do others as well. I know.
Well, we have just one question actually so far from Andrew,
okay.
And he's asking about one of the. He's saying the graph of motivation for behavioral change is interesting, but to achieve improved firefighter safety, we need to flip these results on their head and make home safety the most important element. So how do we convince homeowners that the path to achieving improved firefighter safety starts with them cleaning up their own backyard?
Yeah, that has been a great focus. I mean, you remember you are dealing with people and trying to get onto their plate of responsibilities that they have, and I think 3 ways to do it. When you come to present the issue, it needs to be in a way that doesn't overwhelm them, doesn't leave them just listening, maybe receiving something, and that's it. It needs to be built up over time. That may take a while then to build in, but the goal is to get them to do something they may already not be doing. Or then as a second piece, to understand the risk. They may not know that this is a risk in an area that then they can do something about. The third then, I think ultimately, is to have firefighters play a role in those presentations. It may be them talking about historic fires that have occurred in the area, or what they can do around properties. I know we've seen a lot in the US that there are communities assume that the fire service can come until they find out the limitations they have to arrive onto a scene, what needs to be done to help. So finding that way that the two can talk with each other about really the shared risks they have starts to show the roles that each can play. And I think would ultimately then get to that goal that you so rightly bring up of promoting and ensuring firefighter safety, because you're reducing that structural ignition potential in an area. It also allows them to focus on the fire itself as it's moving and not trying to do both, because now you're bringing in more variables to what the fire service is trying to achieve. We can't solely rely on the fire service saving us and putting it all on their shoulders. We need to help and play a part in that role. So those are all key things to bring up.
Thank you so much for the great answer. Very, very diverse perceptions, I'd say. Next question is from Shamim Rachid Samar. And Shamim is thanking you for the presentation. And she's asking, what are your thoughts on limiting combustible construction times in the wildland user interface, using provisions such as those in fire district regulations?
Um, Obviously, ultimately, that is the best way. When it's led by policy, led by government, that creates that landscape. Um, Obviously, people are then involved. Fire departments are involved. Others involved. Issues that sometimes trip that up is then the enforcement. The code compliance. Does everyone understand the relevance of this? I think as you look across areas, there's going to be realities of home construction, of home materials, the skilled workforce for the creation of those homes. And importantly, an issue of affordability. We don't want to make a home, wildfire proof, but unlivable in because no one can afford it, or that those types of homes are only for folks who can afford that type of protection. So it's working with that spectrum of industry and the rest to see what are performance standards that can be adopted and met and worked towards. What are realities that then, if a home is wood, okay, how do you envelope and protect the home? Because ultimately we don't want the home to burn down. And we can find ways to achieve that and still, involve the building materials or structures that are relevant and realistic to areas.
Thank you so much for the great answer. Very interesting question.
Yeah, it is, and it's a big challenge. That itself could be a blog, so we should probably explore it more.
Exactly. Yes, it's one of the main I think protection features in the wide open interface.
No.
So I think that's beside the vegetation, of course. That's one of the that's the last question we have for today. Well, we have some time if anyone has any question. If not, we would thank everyone, and I will pass the mic back to Mario. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Nemer. Thank you, Lucian. That was our webinar for today. I would like to conclude by announcing that all of our webinars are recorded and available on the Symposium webpage and on the PyroLife YouTube channel. And for next week will be our final webinar as part of this international symposium. And we will have George Boustras, professor in risk assessment at the European University of Cyprus, discussing effective translation of fire to policy, and Miriam Arenas Conejo, a sociology researcher at the Open University of Catalonia, discussing complexifying social analysis and risk management. This is our next week as I previously said, next week will be our last webinar as part of this international symposium, but stay tuned because following that we'll be conducting monthly webinars as part of the PyroLife project, and we will keep you updated with the news. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you guys next week.